What if I told you that the same Microsoft 365 subscription you're already paying for might hold the keys to enterprise-grade data protection without requiring a massive budget or team of engineers? Today, we're tackling one of the biggest myths around Microsoft Purview and Azure information protection, and I'm going to show you just how accessible these tools really are. If you've ever thought, that sounds too complex for my team, yet you're about to see why that assumption could be holding your organization back. The biggest myth about data protection. If you think data protection requires enterprise-scale budgets, you might be holding back your business without realizing it. This belief is surprisingly common. Many owners and IT managers assume Microsoft Purview and Azure information protection are designed only for giant corporations with entire security departments. It sounds logical on the surface. How could something used by banks, law firms, and global manufacturers possibly make sense for a 20-person company? But that assumption hides a problem. When smaller teams talk themselves out of using the exact protections they already have access to, the result isn't savings. The result is more risk, more exposure, and in many cases, a lot of unnecessary stress. The idea that these tools are built only for the big players has kept countless small and medium-sized organizations on the sidelines. They imagine complex policy documents, weeks of consulting fees, and a flood of new jargon their staff won't understand. In reality, skipping protection altogether is like leaving the front door unlocked because you assume only banks need security systems. It's a mismatch. Risk is blind to company size. A 5-person accounting firm with no protection at all may actually be a softer target than a multinational with layers of controls. Think about it this way. Not every business needs an armored vault for storing paper records. Most are better off with a simple locked cabinet and a clear rule about who has the key. Microsoft's tools can absolutely provide vault-level protection if you need it, but they also scale down to cabinet-level simplicity. It's not about forcing every company into the same mold. It's about matching tools to the way you actually work, without creating a mess of procedures that nobody wants to follow. This misconception doesn't just play out in theory, it shows up in actual data. Surveys consistently show that a majority of smaller businesses skip data protection features because they think setup will be too technical or time-consuming. This leaves a gap. Sensitive contracts, personal records, or even internal pricing data ends up moving around without any meaningful guardrails. And everyone feels fine until the day something leaks or a client asks about compliance and the answer isn't reassuring. What makes this even more frustrating is that small teams can succeed with these tools without outside consultants. I've seen organizations of under 10 people roll out sensitivity labels on their own. One nonprofit in particular started with nothing but an Office 365 Business Premium license and a motivated office manager. They created 2 simple labels in an afternoon, one for general use and one for confidential board documents. That was it. No giant project plan, no consultants, no extra spend. Within days, the board learned exactly when they were dealing with sensitive files, and the organization had a level of clarity they'd never had before. Proof that not only is the technology approachable, but everyday administrators can own it. The reason this even works is because of how Microsoft designed Purview and AIP. These tools aren't bolted on extras, they're built to scale. That means if you're a hospital with 10,000 employees, you can run dozens of labels and policies covering every department. But if you're a 10-person design shop, the exact same system can handle 2 categories of data with almost no overhead. Microsoft didn't design one product for giants and another for everyone else. They deliberately made sure the same foundation works across different sizes of organizations. This is where the myth really starts to fall apart. Many features people assume cost extra are already sitting in subscriptions they pay for every month. If you're running Microsoft 365 for email, Word, Excel, and Teams, you may already have core Purview features quietly waiting. Sensitivity labels, basic data loss protection, even entry-level information governance. You don't need an additional line item in your budget to turn those on. You only need to recognize what's there. So when people say, that's not for us, we don't have the budget, what they really mean is we didn't realize we already had access. The truth is, foundational safeguards are bundled right into the licenses organizations buy every day, which means the so-called barrier isn't complexity, cost, or size, it's awareness. Now that the myth is gone, let's talk about what's actually inside your subscription. What you already own in Microsoft 365. Imagine logging into your Microsoft 365 tenant today and finding out that enterprise-grade protections are already there waiting. No add-on invoices, no complicated procurement cycles, just features sitting quietly in your compliance portal, included in the license you already pay for every month. That's the reality with Microsoft Purview. The trick is, most teams don't realize it because the features aren't front and center. You don't stumble across them while scheduling a Teams call or editing a spreadsheet. They live in the compliance portal, which not every admin checks unless they've been told to. And that's where the gap starts. Tools exist, but they're dormant simply because no one went looking. Here's where it gets confusing. A lot of organizations hear Purview and assume it must be a premium service layered on top of a basic subscription. They figure it's locked away inside some high-tier package meant only for enterprise customers. In practice, that's not true. Microsoft bundles core Purview features right inside common licenses like Microsoft 365 E3 Business Premium and, of course, the higher-end E5 licenses. The difference is in depth, not existence. With E3 or Business Premium, you still get sensitivity labels, basic data loss prevention, and some baseline compliance reporting. E5, on the other hand, stacks on advanced analytics, insider risk tools, and automated machine learning classifiers. But the critical point is this: if you're running E3 or Business Premium, you've already got enough to make meaningful progress today without upgrading a thing. Take a typical SMB running Microsoft 365 E3. They get Exchange, Teams, and SharePoint in the bundle, of course, but hidden in the package are Purview sensitivity labels, enough to tag files and emails by confidentiality level. That means data protection doesn't require a bigger license or a brand new budget request. It's sitting there already. Now contrast that with E5. Yes, E5 unlocks more, like automatic labeling, communication compliance, and fancy analytics dashboards, but those are bonus features. They're not the starting point. For the majority of businesses, E3 is already more than enough to stop worrying about sensitive files wandering out the door unmarked. So how do you actually check what you've got without guessing? You log into the Microsoft 365 compliance portal. It's usually found at compliance, microsoft.com. Once there, you'll see Purview features listed along the left-hand menu: information protection, data loss prevention, and more. Click into information protection and you'll often notice sensitivity labels ready to be defined, even if your organization has never touched this area before. That ready out-of-the-box piece surprises almost everyone. The portal organizes features by function and quietly flags which ones you have licensed. If you hover over one that's restricted, it'll tell you what upgrade is required, so you can immediately see where your subscription ends and where extras begin. What's important is recognizing how much of the security framework is included from day one. Sensitivity labels and manual classification in most mid-tier subscriptions by default. Basic DLP policies covering things like credit card numbers or tax IDs. Also included, retention labels to help with compliance needs. They're there too. You don't need to write a check for those. Where upgrades kick in are areas like machine learning for automatically detecting sensitive data or insider risk management that ties user behavior to alerts. Useful? Yes. Essential to start? No. For smaller teams, the starting block is way lower and starting brings most of the value. This is why so many SMBs overspend or hesitate. The assumption is they'll need consultants, third-party tools, or major upgrades before getting value. In practice, the gap is often awareness. Cost savings are real because no extra payment is needed to roll out foundational protection. Accessibility is real because the tools are baked right in. The hard part is simply realizing you already own them and then taking the first step to switch them on. And that first step is light years easier than most people expect. Once you confirm the features in your subscription, the question shifts from, do we have this, to what's the smartest way to use it right away? The answer starts with labels. With sensitivity labels, you immediately give your files and emails a clear signal about how they should be handled. They're the entry point because they're easy to set up and users understand them quickly. Most viewers can leave this video and build a baseline of protection in under an hour without a single new license. Let's put those licenses to work by creating your first real sensitivity label. What if your team's first step into data protection took less than 15 minutes? That's usually the reality once people realize sensitivity labels aren't complicated policies buried under hours of setup. They're essentially rules that move with your files and emails, telling people how that information should be handled. Think of them as stamps. If you put confidential on a Word document, that label stays with the file no matter where it goes, and Purview knows what to do with it. Send it as an attachment in Outlook and the label comes along. Save it to SharePoint and the label is still there. It's simple but surprisingly powerful once your team gets used to it. The mistake most organizations make at first is trying to invent an encyclopedia of labels. 10 or 15 different options with names like restricted, internal financial draft, or legal approved distribution only. The admin thinks they're being thorough, but the end user ends up staring at a drop-down that feels more like a standardized test than a helpful tool. Too many categories don't make people more compliant. They make them guess, or worse, ignore the labels completely. Confusion is the fastest way to kill adoption, and that's true whether you have 5 people or 5,000. A cleaner approach is to start where your users are. Consider a small finance team I worked with. They had documents covering everyday budgets, which were fine for internal visibility, and then they had sensitive records like payroll and client statements. So that's pretty much 2 categories. Instead of creating a dozen fancy labels, they rolled out just 2, public and confidential. Public covered anything safe to share outside the company. Confidential covered sensitive records. That's it. The result? People used the labels every single time because the difference was obvious and the rules were easy to follow. It wasn't about precision, it was about making it effortless to do the right thing. The real purpose of sensitivity labels is to give files and emails a clear baseline identity. Users don't care about compliance frameworks or governance theories. They care about whether they're choosing the right option when writing an email or saving a presentation. That's why the best practice isn't to drown people in 20 shades of restricted. It's to set up a core tier of 3 that most scenarios can fall into. In plain English, that's general, confidential, and highly confidential. General is your default, safe for everyone content. Confidential is anything you don't want shared outside the team without thought. Highly confidential is the stuff you absolutely need to put guardrails around. 3 tiers. Everyone understands them. No one needs a manual. Actually, creating a label in Microsoft Purview is straightforward once you know where to start. Log into the compliance portal, head to information protection, and you'll see the sensitivity labels section. From there, create a new label, give it a name and description, and decide what protections it enforces. You can go simple at first, maybe confidential triggers a watermark and a header in documents so it's clear on the page. Or maybe highly confidential applies encryption, so only certain groups in your directory can open those files. The wizard-style interface walks you through the options, and you can publish your new label to users by selecting a policy scope. In less than an hour, you'll have a functioning label in place and visible inside their Office apps. The reason to start small isn't just for convenience, it's because habits form quickly. A new system lives or dies based on whether people understand it and trust it to stay out of their way. If you roll out 3 clear, memorable labels, staff adapt almost immediately. They stop to think once before sending a sensitive doc because the label reminds them. They don't question what restricted level 4 draft internal only means because they never see it. And you, as the admin, get reporting in the background showing how those labels are being applied without spending a cent on consulting. What you walk away with is confidence. Confidence that your organization now has a baseline, that files and emails can carry their classification automatically, and that the whole process didn't eat up weeks of planning. It takes less than an hour to create and publish a label, but that first step gives you a working foundation that scales later if you need it to. Once the labels are in place, the real value starts when you link them to policies that keep sensitive information from walking out your front door. Data loss prevention without breaking workflows. The fear is real. Turn on data loss prevention and suddenly your team won't be able to email clients, share files, or even attach a document without hitting a wall. That's the picture a lot of admins have in their heads, and it's the reason DLP sometimes gets ignored altogether. But here's the thing, that picture is years out of date. Microsoft 365's DLP today doesn't slam the door on your users. Instead, it quietly adds guardrails in the background, nudging them when they're about to do something risky and giving them room to correct it before information actually leaves your organization. At its core, data loss prevention is nothing more than a set of rules that look for sensitive information and then decide what to do about it. The old versions of DLP were blunt, match a credit card pattern, and the email gets blocked outright. That's the behavior admins grew to hate. Because yes, it stopped mistakes, but it also stopped business from happening. Modern DLP in Microsoft 365 works very differently. It's rule-based, but the enforcement is adaptive. Rather than a hard block, it raises a policy tip in Outlook or Word, letting the user know, this looks sensitive, are you sure you want to send it? That simple nudge is surprisingly effective because most leaks happen by accident, not intention. It helps to think of it like a conversation. Instead of security walking in and locking the filing cabinet in front of you, DLP today is more like someone tapping you on the shoulder to say, double check that before it walks out the door. That's enough to catch the moment when someone is about to send a spreadsheet full of tax IDs to the wrong recipient or upload a client contract to the wrong SharePoint folder. If the person has a valid reason to go ahead, they can override with a justification and the action is logged for review. Legitimate business doesn't grind to a halt. Many admins get stuck at the setup stage. They imagine they'll have to build custom expressions for every rule from scratch. The reality is Microsoft includes built-in templates for common regulations, and they cover a lot of ground. If your business handles health records, there's a HIPAA template ready to deploy. If you work with European customers, there's one key to GDPR. Credit card numbers, bank account details, social security numbers, the templates exist, complete with matching patterns already tested. That means you don't have to be a compliance expert to get something in place. You can pick a template, assign it to specific services like Exchange, Teams, or OneDrive, and be monitoring in under an hour. One of the underrated features of modern DLP is the gradual rollout approach. Instead of flipping to block on day one, you can start in audit mode. That way, policies detect sensitive data, but they only create a report in the background. Nothing is blocked, no warnings are shown to users. You collect data for a week or two, review where sensitive content is actually moving, and then decide what thresholds make sense. When people are ready, you switch those same policies into warning mode, adding the gentle shoulder tap. Only after adoption has settled in do you trigger block mode for the riskiest actions. This adaptive rollout lets organizations build muscle memory without overwhelming staff. If you've ever had nightmares about rolling out security that stopped operations cold, this should sound familiar and also relieving. You don't have to pick between zero protection and draconian controls. You can build a staircase, observe quietly, then warn, then enforce. And because the rules live inside Microsoft 365 itself, they follow your data across Exchange Online, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. A single policy can catch someone pasting a credit card into Teams chat the same way it can catch someone trying to email a list of them externally. The surprising part is just how painless it is to get started. Let's say you want one simple protection: stop credit card numbers from leaving unmarked. You go into the compliance portal, create a new DLP policy, choose the financial template, scope it to Exchange and SharePoint, and set it to warn users if they share content. In testing, you'll see the system detect those numbers with impressive accuracy. You didn't have to write a regex, you didn't have to pay for custom coding, and yet you've got a working shield in less than an afternoon. This is how foundational protection looks now. Not an obstacle course, not a nightmare for your users. It's a background system that catches accidental leaks, gives your team the chance to think twice, and still leaves business running smoothly. You can protect sensitive data without crippling workflows, and that's the shift many teams don't realize has already happened in Microsoft 365. And for many organizations, protection isn't complete until emails themselves are secured. Email protection that works for users. Your team shouldn't need a PhD to send a secure email. That's where Azure Information Protection comes in, and this is the piece that often surprises people. Email is still the number one way sensitive data escapes an organization, and the balancing act is always the same. If encryption is too complicated for staff, they'll either avoid it or make mistakes. If it's too relaxed, the protection doesn't actually stop leaks. Getting that balance right is where Purview sensitivity labels meet AIP, and the end result is security that actually works for users instead of slowing them down. Picture a human resources manager working on salary adjustments. She needs to email spreadsheets with pay changes to department heads. If that message goes out unprotected and lands in the wrong inbox, you don't just have an awkward moment. You have compliance violations, serious trust issues, and possibly legal consequences. In the past, encrypting that message meant walking through extra steps, forcing recipients to install plugins, or double-checking manual settings every single time. Most people didn't do it. They either took shortcuts or made the wrong configuration choice. That's exactly the kind of failure point Microsoft set out to remove. The strength of AIP is that encryption no longer feels like a separate process. You don't hit send, then stop to open another tool, then paste your message in. Instead, you apply a sensitivity label. That's it. Choose confidential, and the encryption is automatic. The label travels with the email, and behind the scenes, it enforces rules you've already defined in Purview. Only the intended recipients can open that email regardless of where it goes. If it's forwarded, the protections stay intact. If it's saved outside the organization, the access controls still apply. To the sender, nothing looks different beyond picking a label. The flow is simple. Apply the label, let Purview do its job, and trust that only the right people have access. It's one of those rare cases where the experience looks almost too easy for the security it delivers. Users don't see extra prompts. They don't need to choose a cipher or remember which toggle encrypts attachments. By design, the hard work is invisible. And for the person receiving the message, the process is just as clean. If they already use Microsoft 365, they open the email directly in Outlook like any other. If they don't, they get a one-time passcode sent to their inbox or a quick authentication link through their existing Microsoft account. No plugins, no downloads, no frustration. It's friction-free, and that's what drives adoption. What's important here is resisting the temptation to encrypt everything. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Imagine every single message flagged and locked down. Staff would ignore the system out of sheer annoyance, and your clients would start calling back asking, why do I need a code just to read meeting notes? The practical approach is to start small with high-value scenarios: HR records, finance reports, contracts under negotiation. These are the cases where encryption solves a real problem and where the impact is clearest. Once people see how painless it is, you can expand coverage where it actually makes sense, not everywhere by default. The other benefit is consistency. Because labels drive the encryption, you're not asking users to become data security experts. They don't decide what encryption method to use. They decide what kind of data they're handling. The rules flow naturally from that one decision. It's easier to train, easier to enforce, and much less prone to error. Compliance officers love it because it provides an audit trail. End users love it because they don't feel like IT is throwing extra hurdles in their way. The balance, secure where it matters, transparent everywhere else, finally works. So yes, it's entirely possible to secure sensitive emails in Microsoft 365 without forcing your staff to change the way they work. One or two core labels can automatically apply encryption, attach the right usage restrictions, and keep sensitive details from leaking out, all without anyone needing extra training. That HR manager sending payroll files can stay focused on the task instead of wrestling with settings, and you gain the confidence that the data isn't slipping into the wrong hands. And with those three pieces working together, labels for classification, DLP for guardrails, and AIP for seamless email protection, you've already built a foundation of safeguards most small and mid-sized businesses never realize they already own within their Microsoft 365 subscription. Strong data protection isn't about building the most complex system. It's about starting with the tools already sitting in your Microsoft 365 subscription and making them work for your team. Purview and AIP were never meant to intimidate. They were meant to make security approachable. So here's the challenge. Log into the Microsoft Purview compliance portal today, create a single sensitivity label, and publish it. In less time than a lunch break, you'll have taken a meaningful step towards safeguarding your data. If a small business can configure real protection in an afternoon, why should larger organizations still be waiting?